we wrong about parity? I have a video that I'll put in the description on where I go over the basic idea of what parity is and how to solve a parity error. In that, I say a parity error is something that doesn't normally occur on a 3x3 that you can find on a 4x4 or other larger cubes. But is this true? I have a lot of discussion with people online, especially Facebook, on what a parity is. And a lot of people claim that parity is something on any larger cube where you have to switch edges around. So like this case, on a 5x5 where you need to switch these two back and forth. Now, some people call that an edge parity, and I would argue though that that's not one because since it's an odd layered cube, you have that center edge piece that helps you orient them before you get to the OLL stage. Some people even claim that doing an odd permutation in blind solving is parity, but they only say that because it's something odd that doesn't occur very often. So let's look at this. Parity at its roots is a mathematical term. So something like 3 and 7 are both the same parity because they are both odd numbers. Now, a lot of cubers I've talked to understand this definition, but say that parity in cubing is different than parity in mathematics. And I used to agree with them, but I'm not so sure anymore. So I first went to the speed solving wiki to see what they define it as. And they say, whether a move or sequence of moves swaps pieces an even or odd amount of times. If a puzzle is described as having an even parity, only moves with even parity are possible. If a puzzle is described as having odd parity, then it can perform both odd and even parity moves. Now, I was just going to use that as sort of a final say. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, and I found an article from MIT. This was published in 2009, and it says, permutations can be described in terms of their parity. The cube, referring to a 3x3, always has an even parity, or an even number of cubies exchanged from the starting position. Since any permutation of the Rubik's Cube has an even parity, there is no move that will exchange a single pair of cubes. Now, I'll link that article in the description because it's really fascinating. There's a lot of cool stuff in there. It says relatively the same thing as the speed solving wiki, but I think just a little bit better and describes it in a more mathematical way. This describes things in that mathematical way, but how can we describe this as a parity error that we see in cubing? So let's take something like a U permutation. When you look at that, it looks like there's 3 pieces being moved around. And you'd say, well, that's an odd parity, but there's actually 2 swaps going on. So if we consider these pieces as A, B, and C, A and B are swapping, and then B and C are swapping. When solving a 4x4 in reduction method, you can come across what people call a parity problem, or more commonly a parity. When doing reduction, when you get to the OLL stage, sometimes you need to swap 2 pieces of the edge, which you wouldn't even have in a 3x3. And because that's just a single swap, that would be an odd parity. Or when you get to the PLL stage, and you need to swap 2 edges, which you cannot do on a 3x3, it's again an odd parity, switching those 2 edges and fixing what would be a parity problem, non-existent, on a 3x3. What about on a 5x5 when you need to switch 2 edges around? I did not consider that a parity before because it was something that in my definition wasn't a parity. A parity to me was something that you just wouldn't see on a 3x3. But since an odd parity is something we're more sticking to, since in a 5x5 you are just swapping those 2 edges doing the 4x4 OLL parity algorithm, yes, that would be an odd parity and could be considered a parity problem, parity error. So what about shape mods? Now there's a lot of things like a mirror cube which look just like a 3x3 with shapes, but something like a megamorphics is a little bit more complex. On there you have 3 of the same edges, and because of that you can have things that you wouldn't normally see in a 3x3, and a lot of people will call that a parity error. But that's not actually a parity error. Since it's just a 3x3, there's still only even movements you can do. There's still only even parities. You can't do an odd parity movement. What that would be is a false equivalency. What's happening is you're noticing something that doesn't look like a normal 3x3 even though it is. Lastly, we come to blind solving though, odd permutations. A lot of people will say doing an odd permutation during blind solving, if you're doing something like old Pachman method, would be a parity, mainly just because it doesn't occur all the time and it's kind of weird. But no, that is just an odd permutation. And odd permutations are even parities because you're swapping 2 edge pieces and 2 corner pieces, which is even. So now we come to the big issue. Can the definition change? Now semantic shifts happen all the time, words change and evolve, but should a definition change just because people have been using it incorrectly for long enough? What we should take away from this is that parity originally refers to an odd or even number of movements, and on a cube it's referring to odd or even pieces moving. On a 3x3, you can only have even parities, while on odd layered cubes and other things like a square 1, you can have odd parities and odd movements. So thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and as always, stop by speedcubeview.com for more news and reviews.